This is the Watchmen podcast on TV Podcast Industries, and we're talking about feedback for the finale of Watchmen, Episode 9, See How They Fly. Welcome back, fellow watchers. This is TV Podcast Industries. I'm one of your hosts, Derek, and we're here talking about Watchmen Episode 9, the finale of the series. See How They Fly.
Hello there, fellow watchers. Yes, this is the final bulletin of our Atomic Watchers. And yes, we're looking at Episode 9. I am one of your other hosts, John. TikTok.
And rounding out this fabulous trio, I'm Chris.
Excellent. You know, I had the final bulletin of our Atomic Watchers written out in front of me this time, and I still forgot it. What I'm very impressed with, though, we're on video Skype with Chris, and I'm wearing a nice blue jumper, and Chris is just covered in a nice Dr. Manhattan blue glow as we look at him here.
Yes, Dr. Manhattan has just flashed at him.
I am sorry to say I'm slowly just going to peel off my skin and become blue all over. Or I should say I blew myself.
There you go.
For our Arrested
my God.
Excellent. Yes. Well, as Chris is sitting here as our Dr. Manhattan, even though he is Topher, as we've discussed before, and John is also John with a H, what does that make me in the universe of Watchmen? I'm trying to work out. There's no Derek.
Luke, man.
Oh, maybe.
Dirk Digley.
There's no Derek, there's no O'Neill, there's nobody in there representing me, so we just have John and Topher here with Derek, the host, for this episode. We are going to dive straight into feedback for this episode because there is absolutely loads. Everybody wants to talk about the finale of Watchmen, possibly the finale of the whole show completely. If you want to stay subscribed to us and see what we're doing in the future, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on tvpodcastindustries.com. Loads of options there for you. You can always subscribe on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on Stitcher, everywhere you can find podcasts. We are there and always free for our main feed and all of our podcasts as well.
Yes, but don't forget, we also need to keep the lights on, so support the show and think about jumping over to patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries, where just a single dollar, single euro, single pound, you can help us do what we love and what you love listening to.
And as always, you may be listening to these podcasts a little bit later than when we finished all of our feedback. You can still send in feedback. We love reading any thoughts that you have on the show that we may not have thought about. You can email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. John, do you want to take the first piece of feedback?
Certainly. Our first bit of email feedback comes from Dave Horrocks over on Comics in Motion podcast. Dave goes, "Hey guys, really looking forward to hearing your feedback episode and whichever series you decide to tackle next. I'm sure I've said it before, but the work you guys put in is amazing, and especially with a dense property like Watchmen. I really appreciate listening and the insight from all the research you do." Thank you very much, Dave. It's really great to hear from you and those kind words as well. Really nice. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. And I want to say a huge congratulations to Dave and the Comics in Motion podcast that just reached their 100th episode a couple of weeks ago. So that is a massive achievement. Anybody who does podcasting knows how massive it is to get to that 100 episode mark. We did it a little while ago ourselves. But congratulations, Dave. We didn't get the chance to send a message in. We usually try and do that for our friends who podcasted for their 100th episode. And we just didn't get the chance with everything that we were doing specifically on Watchmen.
Yes, congratulations, Dave. As someone who we are now in our triple digits, and we just hit our 4th centennial episode. We are definitely know how hard it is. So congratulations.
Yeah.
Keep up the good work. And we'll see you when you hit 200.
Absolutely. Oh, and quick recommendation for any of our watchers. They've just done a review of Batman Returns, which is their Christmas episode. Have a listen. You may find it surprising what Dave's opinion is of Batman Returns. I did watch it recently, and I might have to agree with Dave's opinion. Anyway, not going to spoil their podcast. Go listen to it. John?
Dave continues, "I'm a fan of the original Watchmen comic series and was fascinated with what Lindelof would do with this series. From my perspective, what he and his writers' room have done is pretty amazing. It would have been so easy to go back to the well and retread what we've seen from the comics and also the movie, but to take the world and build on it the way they do, while also knitting in real-world history and racial issues, is simply fantastic. If I were to have one small criticism, in where they haven't quite captured the essence of Watchmen is how the story wrapped up. The original story leaves the reader contemplating what is right and wrong, who is good or bad in the traditional comic book style. You're left wondering whether Adrian was right and whether the ends justify the means. The TV series wraps up quite nicely, and the villain, who has quite a Silver Age motivation to steal the powers of the god and presumably take over the world, is defeated. The other thing I'm left pondering is how many viewers enjoy the show who knew nothing about the original comic or movie. I had recommended the series to a colleague who was looking for something new to get into, but not knowing anything about the original story. They just couldn't get past the first episode. And when we got the Dr. Manhattan reveal, I was left wondering why any new viewers would care about that. Keep up the great work, guys. Laters, Dave. Thanks, Dave, for that. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I think we've certainly waxed lyrical about this show. I mean, I've never given so many 5s out of 5 before. And I think certainly coming at it from the, comic issues, for people who have just never bothered, I suppose, there's a lot of layers, a lot of textures, a lot of context around a lot of these characters, which may quite easily get lost on them. So I definitely get your point there for sure.
Yeah. So on the piece around people, other non-comic book or movie watchers and viewers, whether they enjoyed it. Speaking from experience, my wife, who is not a comic book fan, who is not, has probably, to my knowledge, has not watched the film. She watched this along with me. She really enjoyed it. They went a long way in terms of trying to explain the significance of some of these characters.
Absolutely.
So, they had shown Dr. Manhattan before. Could they have done a better job for more of the kind of quote-unquote newbies? I don't think so. I think it was just layered enough. It piqued enough people's interest. I think it is not a show for everyone. I've recommended the show to multiple people, and I'd say 80 to 90% have watched it and enjoyed it. There is always that 10%, but that's okay. Not all shows are created equally for everyone. It's kind of, some people prefer The Bachelor or Love Island. Yeah. Some people prefer Watchmen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm not saying one's better than the other.
Yeah.
I could probably argue which one is better, but I'm not going to. Each to their own. So I think I would argue it for a long time. Both have a large amount of nudity. But one is blue and the other is just normal. Both have a lot of very strong script.
You didn't have to argue though, Chris. It's okay. You can move on.
Okay, sorry. I thought you were asking me.
No.
No. So to kind of to the point of what Dave is saying around, could people be left pondering too many questions, and is it for everyone? I think it is. I just think it's not not everyone will fall in love with the show. I think a majority of people.
I think the good news is the ratings bear out that this was a massively popular show, and that if we know anything about comic books over our years of covering comic book sales are actually very low in comparison to what you think. The amount of people that tune into a TV show every week or go out to a movie far outstrip the amount of people that read a comic book, especially a comic book this old. This is something from the mid-'80s. So while a lot of people have read it, and while it's one of those books that people put up and say you have to read it, I know a lot of people haven't read the book and watch the show. They may have been tempted to pick it up while they were watching the show weekly. That's great. We do have a bit of feedback from some of our listeners who've never read the book before, so that's really good. What I would say is, by being a comic book reader, I think you get tipped off a little earlier to some of the bigger reveals or some of the reveals in the show. But I think they made a satisfactory description of why it should matter to you that Angela is becoming Dr. Manhattan. I think they gave enough of a reveal about Dr. Manhattan and what his powers are before they revealed who Dr. Manhattan is and what was happening in the show, I suppose. So I think everybody's able to be brought along, and that's the magic of what's happened with this writer's room, really.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the writers have been fantastic. Mm-hmm. So I think, yeah, definitely.
Thanks so much for that, Dave. Chris, do you want to take the next piece of feedback?
Yes, we also have an email from Jimbo who says, fellas, what a series. As so often happens, the final episode perhaps did not quite hit some of the highs set earlier in the season, but it was still a highly satisfying conclusion to this outstanding show. Whisper it, but I might actually prefer this story to that of the original comic books. Jimbo went on to say, I loved how the story finally came together, managed to get all the key characters into the same location for the showdown. After such a great development and originality, even the likes of Red and Pirate Jenny managed to have their moments. My earlier theory that no trillionaire could ever be a baddie still holds up, but was done here in a very funny way. Lady T's origin conception story was definitely the most unusual one I have seen, but I'm still not quite sold on her Bond villain plans. As with all her brains and resources, I don't really see why she even needed to bother with the cavalry to have to get it done. I also enjoyed the whole Adrian escape and frozen and carbonite sequence. We're not calling it carbonite, we're calling it goldenite. Despite previous concerns over the whole zaniness of the situation, I think only someone with the acting chops of Jeremy Irons could have pulled something like this off. Pairing him up with Laurie and Wade, but sadly no Petey, for a few scenes was genius, in more ways than one. Some mixed emotions over his potential fate back in prison, although to be fair, it's totally justified. You still have this feeling that it might not be the end of him though, especially if you can get a hold of another horseshoe. The last scene was also both satisfying and very appropriate, as this really has been Angela's story. That final shot of her foot over the pool really reminded me of something else. And I thought it was the spinner at the end of Inception, but I can't help feeling it is something else. So I'm keen to hear your thoughts on what this could be too. I have not even got around to mentioning the timeless and themes experienced here of racism, conspiracy and strong female leads. And I don't think I've ever used a 6-syllable word like cinematography as often I have in recent months. Even the eggs, which I guess represented birth, family, legacy, were utilized so well throughout this season. I don't think I've ever said this before, but I agree with you that I hope the show is a one and done. And I would certainly rather leave Angela's stories there. As I saw with Anakin in the prequels, not everything needs explaining. Hey, let's not rag on the prequels too much, but moving on. I still feel this was more a series of individually standout ideas where the single episodes were perhaps better than the overall story arc. And I still think episode 6, Hood of Justice, was one of perhaps the best things I've ever seen on TV, and would be keen to hear if you guys have any favourite episodes. Overall, I truly, see what you did there, groundbreaking series, and I want to say thank you to the three of you for making it really more immersive and interesting to watch. Really looking forward to seeing what your plan is for 2020, and keep up the feedback episodes. All the best for the festive season, Jimbo. Thank you so much, Jimbo. That was an amazing feedback email. Really appreciate it. Okay, where to start? First of all, leave the prequels alone, all right? Like, I still love them. Anyway, moving on. George Lucas, we still love
you
him.
can slag off the prequels as much as you'd like. It's no problem at all. The one thing I will say, I have loved doing these feedback episodes. They've been great fun. Doing 2 episodes a week on the topic of Watchmen. It's only thanks to your feedback that we're able to do it, because there's a lot to talk about yet, but I think if we had to talk about every single week, if the show, for example, wasn't as dense as The Watchmen, we probably wouldn't do a feedback episode and an episode about what we just watched. There's a lot of content in The Watchmen, and we love getting your feedback, and everybody has some great thoughts about the show, but it's only because of the feedback that comes into us. If we got one piece of feedback a week, we'd probably just save it for the podcast. So I'm really glad that our wonderful watchers have been sending in some great feedback this season, including yourself, Jimbo.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jimbo. I think myself, I completely agree. It was great having Laurie and Wade with Adrian Veidt at Karnak. I too wish that Petey had been there. I just feel he kind of dropped off a sewer cliff to an extent. It was probably I think he probably got carried away. It was a bit like Harrison Ford in Fugitive, over the edge of the sewer dam or something. But yeah.
Well, when we get to PCPD, we'll find out.
Well, exactly.
He is kind of a fugitive now, yes.
But yeah, I think that was a great thing. And it certainly, brought the whole zaniness of Adrian, on the Jupiter moon of Europa sort of kind of to a nice conclusion, I thought. And certainly, as I said in the podcast, I just loved the fact that his daughter got him to stand with his hands on his hips. As he gets sprayed gold
to fit into the action figure mold that she prepared for him. It's really, really good. One of the things you didn't really talk about with regards to Lady True and her plan in the episode that stood out to me the next time I watched the episode, because I did watch it again because it's that bloody good. There was a lot of references to her being a Christ-like figure in the episode that we didn't really call out very much. There's the moment just before the ship falls on her head, where you have a Jesus Christ statue right beside her, which breaks off and falls to the ground just before she's crushed. So a reference there, the little hat that she pops onto her head before she goes. If you look at it from behind, it actually looks like a halo. So she feels she's becoming a deity. Someone pointed out, if you pause it at the right moment, now it's a very tenuous link, but if you pause it at the right moment, she's standing in front of the 7th Cavalry leaders, the Cyclops leaders, and she looks like Jesus at the Last Supper just before she kills them all. So these are all references to the fact that she believes she's becoming a better deity than Dr. Manhattan was. Again, we talked about it on the main podcast, but she believes she could do something better with the plans of Dr. Manhattan, and it's because even though she's the smartest one in the world, she still doesn't understand his actual powers. If she got the powers, she'd just experience all of time at the same time, realize she can't change anything that's going to happen anyway, and probably end off in the same situation that Dr. Manhattan was, just careering towards her final fate, rather than actually being able to change the world. But that is the narcissistic attitude that she brings to her plan. It's, I can do better, so give me the power. So I don't think she was going to control the world. I think she was going to do all of this, what she thought, surreptitiously, and make the changes that she believes the world should have needed to fix their problems, I suppose. So intriguing plan, but just interesting that they had a lot of references to the fact that she believed herself to be the new Christ figure, effectively. So, yeah.
Yeah. I've had one more viewing of it as well since, and I'm starting to lean more into her plan. I have seen people kind of go, this Bond villain plan. I've seen that term kind of pop up a few times. I kind of think it's a lot more layered nuances, and I do think that there was definitely a good rationale and reason for her to use the cavalry. And we explained it in our podcast on the review, essentially, that she was hiding her involvement from Dr. Manhattan by using the cavalry. And kind of setting them up, if you want, to be the fall guy, to get them to do everything for her. And I think that is a good thing. It's the if anything, the Bond villain is Senator Keene Jr. That is your stereotypical, kind of Dr. Evil.
He stands in front of her, lays out his plan as if he's already won, and then is destroyed 2 seconds later, basically. So that is a typical Bond villain moment there, yeah.
But yeah, no, great. And please, yes, keep looking forward, Jimbo, to what we have coming up in 2020. We'll be talking at the very end of this episode, just to make everyone wait till the end. But watch this space. And keep up the great feedback, more importantly. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jimbo. Next piece of feedback comes in from Benjamin Elsley. He says, "Hey there, Chris and John. Thanks again for the podcast. I look forward to it every week after the show. I'm sad it's now over, but as Derek said, season 2 is watching season 1 again, and I will definitely be doing just that. What an amazing show. Nothing ever ends. I do have a suspicion that Will has Dr. M's powers as well as Angela. He was in the kitchen when Angela noticed the intact egg in the carton and asked if she needed a hand, like he was waiting to see if she noticed the egg. Maybe Will put it in there. The carton did seem to be moved away from the cracked eggs. Also, did anyone notice that when Angela is holding the egg in the bar scene and asking Dr. M about his powers, in one shot, the egg has a shell, and in another shot it looks shiny and smooth like a hard-boiled egg, which could be a hint to the hard-boiled egg Will ate in Angela's bakery. After all, he is quite a spry 100-plus-year-old, and he made a deal with Dr. M a few years ago at his house. Who knows?"
Yeah, that's an interesting theory there, Benjamin, for sure. I kind of quite like it. I know what you mean. I mean, Will is a sprightly 100-plus-year-old, and he certainly doesn't seem as though he's going to slow down anytime soon, although I think things will get quieter for him now that the plan has come to fruition.
He's going to sleep for 4 days.
Well, that's true. But yeah, I mean, that's an interesting idea because, yeah, that they make a deal. I suppose we're all really thinking that it's the deal that has unfolded over this series. But maybe, just maybe, he has also ingested some of Dr. Manhattan's protein.
I like the idea. I don't think it's what they were implying. I do see him as the Bruce Wayne, like the very old Bruce Wayne, that has essentially become the Bruce Wayne from Batman Beyond. He's in the wheelchair. He's kind of shuffling forward. He's still a crazy old man. And he can do things with his flashy lights. It's very much brains over brawn in this situation. Yeah. That's the way I kind of see him. He's the old Bruce Wayne. He's to a degree hung up his cowl. But he's still, or in this case, hood, I should say. But he's still formidable.
I really like, because there's a moment in that conversation with Angela in the Dreamland Theatre where Will just seems to look like his plan has all come to fruition. He doesn't really give any care at all about the death of Dr. Manhattan or Lady True or everything else. He's gotten what he wanted to accomplish done. He got all the heads of the Cyclops organization dead in one moment. I love, because he just seems so relaxed when he finds it out from Angela. He's like, did everything happen the way it should have happened? Yep. Dr. Manhattan, yeah, he was a nice guy, and I know he was your husband and stuff, but, you know, he had a lot of power and he should have used the power better. Because I just basically did. Because I orchestrated the whole thing here to kill all the heads of the Cyclops. Wasn't that awesome? I just really liked that moment with Will. But yeah, never know. That might be a little plot point if we do get a season 2. Benjamin continues, my wife also pointed out that seeing Cal Hatton in the lithium cage reminded her of Ota Benga, who was an African man who was taken from the Congo and put in a cage for display at the Bronx Zoo and the World's Fair in New York in the early 1900s. That is just an absolutely awful, awful story, Benjamin. Yeah, I saw that there. You've directed us to the Wikipedia page. You can kind of see that may have been a touch point, may have been a reference. It's just an absolutely awful story of a person kidnapped from their home country and stuck on display as a pygmy, I think is how they describe it in the Wikipedia entry.
Yeah, it's a pretty grim thought, isn't it, to be honest? Yeah, it's the pygmies of the Congo.
Right.
Forest tribes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Just awful. Just shows you how horrible human beings can be, you know, especially at the point of difference. Anything that makes someone different can be a cause for ridicule or a cause for selling tickets for somebody that's in power. You know, it's just absolutely atrocious piece. But I can totally see where your wife would have noticed something like that and seen it as a reference point. Really, thank you so much for that. Finally, Benjamin says, thank you for all your discussions and hard work. It's been a blast going on this Watchmen journey with you all. All the best, Benjamin.
Yeah, thank you so much, Benjamin, for the feedback. And it's been a blast hearing your thoughts on it as well as everyone else's as well.
And it's not that much work. It's lots of fun. It's television we're watching and we're just recording our thoughts. It's great.
So yeah, it's been great to discuss them each week actually, from a whole range of different people. So yeah, a big thank you to all those people, including yourself, Benjamin, who have provided their feedback in writing, through Facebook, and of course through the voicemail as well. Which segue-tastically brings us into our next bit of feedback, which is some voicemail over from Steve Brown.
Hey guys, it's Steve. Wow. Just finished the season finale, series finale. I guess we don't really know of Watchmen. Man, I don't even know where to start. I had to pause and restart the recording because I'm watching the credits go by and I noticed that there's a credit for a Rorschach, and I wonder if that's just one of the cavalry or if maybe there's a deleted scene that we don't have here. So, listed in the credits, there's a Rorschach played by Trey Butler, according to the credits that I'm just watching as they roll, and you can probably hear the music. Great cover of the Iron the Walrus. Wow. I can't wait to watch it several more times. I can't wait to podcast about it, but wonderful ending. I think they answered everything that I had questions about, that most of us had questions about. I think he did a great job, stuck the landing for sure. The use of the squids to wipe out everybody was a chilling. I just got that 22 degrees. But a chilling way to do it. I wonder how many innocents died in that eruption there, those moments. We did see the scare, and Jenny and Beyond were still alive there at the end. And obviously there's more story that could be told, but also we got it wrapped up fairly well, and we get a kind of an ending that's we can make our own decision about it. So can't wait to hear what you guys thought. Talk to you later.
I'm looking forward to hearing what Steve's thought about what happened at the end of that episode, as to whether there is a different choice. I know Steve's doing his final podcast tonight as well, so I will get to hear that tomorrow. Thanks so much for your feedback all season, Steve. I know, as I said before, you recorded directly after watching the episode, so these are all your initial thoughts. So sometimes you're taken off guard, and sometimes you're just really excited about talking about the episode as well. So thanks so much for sending those in to us.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I really like the funky tunes from the end credits playing in the background.
Yep.
Thought that was a nice little touch.
It is a great version of the song. Hopefully you don't get a copyright strike for having the music that we haven't paid for on our podcast.
Yeah, and certainly, like yourself, I like the ending where, it's like Inception, and you can take it one way or another. Mm-hmm. I personally do like to think that Angela Abar got very wet after that moment.
Oh, no. No, I think she was given the power to walk on water. I think that's what we'll find next season. He didn't give her any other powers other than walk on water, because that would make her happy. I think that's what the conversation they had in episode 8 was about. Could you transfer the power to walk on water, and I could do that? I think that's what it was. But you never know. Hopefully he hasn't cursed her with the actual powers of Dr. Manhattan, which is seen as a curse.
It is a curse to all, but a present and a gift to none. I was trying to be really philosophical there and sound really intelligent. It came off terribly. Sorry, guys.
That's all right.
I tried.
Thanks again, Steve. We'll be listening out to your finale podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
And we have another voicemail in from Joel Sharpton.
Hello, TV podcast industries. Joel Sharpton from the Always Listening podcast, and I normally would record this with my microphone and in my studio, but honestly, I forgot to do it earlier today, and I realize I'm not going to get around to it before you guys record tomorrow morning. Or tomorrow morning for me. So I want to make sure and get this in, because I do have a few things to say about the season overall, potentially the series overall, and now I feel confident to say it since it's over. I very much didn't want to say much about the series because I wasn't sure what the point of it was from Damon Lindelof's perspective and the rest of the writers. I knew what I was perceiving, but I wasn't sure where they were going with it. And other than one potentially troublesome issue, I think that they did a fantastic job with this. And so overall, I'm extremely excited to comment on it now and to share it or recommend it to anybody basically who's ever read the original, or even anybody who's watched the film, the Snyder film, and enjoyed that. I feel like largely the Snyder film is a fairly faithful adaptation, even though I don't think he understands it. It's the same thing with Star Wars. I think in many ways George Lucas doesn't understand Star Wars, even though he created it. He doesn't understand what it is that we love about it, which is why he could get the prequel series so wrong in so many ways, and why he seems so betrayed in some ways by what has happened now since Disney's taken it over. That's neither here nor there. My point is this. First, the troublesome issue, or the potentially troublesome issue. And I wondered this actually when the character was first introduced, but at the same time, I didn't know where they were going, so I thought perhaps she was going to be the heroine of the entire piece. Lady True is presented as an immigrant from Vietnam and a Vietnam national, even though in this world, Vietnam is a state now of the United States as opposed to an independent country. Regina King, in the character of Angela, seems to have some residue of the destruction of Vietnam in as much as it relates to the murder of her parents. But even she doesn't really carry the weight of what was done to Vietnam. She somewhat empathizes, and there is that connection that she makes between Hooded Justice, her grandfather, and the young boy who is the bomber that she sees in her childhood. But largely that idea of what is happening in Vietnam being wrong, of what Dr. Manhattan did being wrong, is not really explored much in the series. Dr. Manhattan, I don't think he ever uses the word regret. It's clear, though, that he understands the gravity of it. He understands the gravity of it, but the series doesn't really play that out in any way. That's not the trauma that we are discussing in this season. However, having that as the background for everything that happens in this series and in the original comic too, Vietnam is such a central part of it. And then having who ostensibly ends up being the villain, or one of the villains in this piece, be a Vietnamese national, I think that's troublesome. And I know there are already, I've read a couple today, insightful pieces laying out why that was sort of ham-fistedly done and not a good way to take the story. Having said that, though, that wasn't the parts of this story that Damon Lindelof was brought in on, and one could easily imagine either he or other creators hearing that commentary and then reacting to that specifically with a story for another future season or another section of this story, however they want to lay this out. If there is more in the future, I think HBO Max is going to demand that there's more in the future. The question is whether Damon will be a part of it or not. I hope so, because he did a really good job with this one. And again, just as Ta-Nehisi Coates' writing sort of inspired this season, the thoughtful takes on the failure of that side of this story could be exactly what inspires the next season. So let's be hopeful that good comes out of that. Otherwise, though, the story of Hooded Justice, the reclaiming of that character as a African American, and in particular one who had personally suffered injustice both as a child and as an adult, and throughout his adult life, in fact, and then even in his legacy. It's interesting that we hear Adrian Veidt lay out, I did this wonderful thing, I saved the world, and nobody knows it, and that makes him so depressed, and that's why he asks Manhattan to send him to, paradise. Well, all of those same things could be said about Hooded Justice. Hooded Justice in many ways saved the world, both physically, literally and figuratively. And also he inspired the entire fad of, vigilante justice in America. And yet nobody knows it. Nobody knows who that character is at all, but even the popular portrayals of him are, a white man, a middle-aged white, normal guy with no story of background injustice, et cetera, et cetera. I guess they do at least portray the homosexual or bisexual nature of his personality, but at the same time, that's played more for laughs and salaciousness in the series within a series than for any, real investigation of what that means for him as a human being, or what it meant, to have that secret contained within the first superhero. Anyway, I love the way that they did it. I sincerely hope that they come back. The other thing that I was left thinking, does Angela or does she not now have the powers? That's, of course, the question that we're left with at the ending. Except that, if you've been listening to, not to point somebody in another direction, but I think you guys have referenced it as well, the official podcast from HBO, they only do 3 episodes for the whole series. They do, 1 episode for each 3 episodes released. But the one about the finale, Damon Lindelof seems shocked that people consider the ending a cliffhanger. Apparently Tim Blake Nelson told him, if you don't think that's the biggest cliffhanger in history, then you're crazy. Well, I don't know that it's the biggest cliffhanger in history, but I do think that it is left ambiguous. And apparently for Lindelof, it was not left ambiguous. That says to me that the power does reside in that egg and that it now resides in Angela. And if we see them in the future, and I do think if there's at all a second season, Angela will be a part of it. I think that she will now have the powers of Manhattan. I wonder what she'll call herself. That's my biggest question. Will she call herself Dr. Manhattan, or will she decide something else? And again, the last words of her grandfather right before she finds the egg and goes out onto the pool, he says, he was a good guy, but knowing all he could do, he could have done more. That's hanging over Angela, I think, too. Interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. Anyway, thank you all for your coverage for the season and for all the coverage that you do at TV Podcast Industries. You guys do a wonderful job. I cannot wait to hear all of the things that are coming in 2020. There are some really fantastic movies coming and TV shows as well. And I think you're going to be focused and covering a lot of those. So yay for more great podcasting. And here's to 2020. Happy New Year.
Thanks so much, Joel. I think he dropped his phone right at the end there, unfortunately. Happy New Year to you as well. Really great to hear from Joel Sharpton. John, you may remember this. Chris, I'm not sure whether you do. On Joel's previous life, he used to review podcasts on a podcast called Pod on Pod. And he reviewed Gotham TV Podcast 4 episodes into our podcasting history. We're now 440 episodes later.
Yes, I do remember that.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
That's great to hear that Joel's still listening along. He did give us a very good rating, which was very nice of him back in the day when we had no idea what we were doing and just sitting in front of microphones talking about a show that hadn't even aired yet. But I always remember him being very polite about the show. So thanks so much for listening along, and thanks so much for your feedback in this episode. Let's get into some of Joel's points, John.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. It's interesting. First off, I definitely kind of like your little Star Wars reference there, for sure. But it's interesting on the Lady True and the Angela Abar thing, because I maybe I'm coming at it slightly different. I don't know whether the series needs to play out the Vietnamese issue. I think that was certainly very much, in the original issue, it was that whole idea of, I suppose, American colonialism. It was very much war and the potential for war to escalate into an armed nuclear conflict, because effectively it was a proxy war between the US and the Soviet Union through the rival factions in Vietnam. So unless this series was about to play out about colonialism in the sense of, because Angela Abar really is part of that occupying force then. Actually, she even says she hates Vietnam. But if we just simply assume that it's a new state of the USA, then I suppose that's why they don't, as such, play that out, maybe to the extent that it could have been a completely different approach to tackling this Watchmen series. And I think they've just decided to tackle it along the lines of racism, white supremacy, and so on. And again, I suppose, depending on the viewpoint with Lady True, if she's part Vietnamese, but Vietnam is part of the States, is she an immigrant? I don't know. That would be like saying that other appropriated parts of the US, that people who are born there aren't US citizens, but are immigrants, which is probably not correct. So, I mean, just that basis. So it's interesting, but I think for me, certainly, I'm not too sure that it needs to play on Vietnam. I think they're trying to, I think they set out quite clear that this was about racism, white supremacy, ultimately, but they have touched on it slightly through some of those latter episodes, certainly looking at Angela Abar in Vietnam when she was young, and meeting Dr. Manhattan. So, yeah. But I agree with you. If she doesn't carry that weight of what happened in Vietnam, but maybe Lady True doesn't either.
Yeah,
to some extent.
So she was born in Vietnam a couple of years before it became a US state. That's the only real bit that we get there. And obviously she carries the weight of her parents getting killed by terrorists in Vietnam, what she would call terrorists. What other people call freedom fighters, as we discussed back in that episode. And there's an indication as well that Bian, the mother of Lady True, is actually a freedom fighter, someone that doesn't agree with Americans being in Vietnam, that there's some indication that that was part of it. It feels like a plot line that was decided on as a starting point, but wasn't followed through because there was so many other things to follow through within the series. And I like your comment there, Joel, as well, that someone else taking up a season 2 has a really good jumping off point to maybe focus on the idea of even just the emigration of African Americans from the mainland America to Vietnam. I think they reference that quite a lot, but we only see it through the eyes of one person, which is Angela Abar, because she's totally alone there after her parents are killed.
Absolutely.
And the experience of that might be really interesting to look at.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's a completely different way of viewing and tackling Watchmen, which Damon Lindelof could have chosen to do it along those lines, specifically focused around Vietnam, and it could actually be an interesting hop-off point around a season 2, for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree with both of you on this. For me, I saw it as Derek said, it was a story thread that was it was generated, they were thinking about taking it forward. And then it was like, no, we have these more important story threads to focus on, which is okay. You see that a lot in shows. What I do feel more is, for me, the environmental character of Vietnam was not on the same level of the environmental character of Tulsa. So while it did play a quite important part in terms of the location, it's more of a plot device than an actual character. And I know that it's not diminishing what happened in it, and I see where you're going, but I think it was just not as important. That being said, I like the idea, and this is now, Damon, if you're listening, or any of the writer room, if you're listening, the idea of tackling immigration and emigration in 2019 through the lens of Vietnam and people there, and building a wall around Vietnam, something like bringing current political issues into this fictional world. That's a very interesting story, tackling those pieces. But yeah, so I can see his comments. And thank you so much for the fantastic feedback. And
I don't think it's a dropped point either. I think that it is mentioned enough. There's a lot of scenes that take place there, and there's a lot of reference to the fact that why people in the area hate Dr. Manhattan was because he effectively annexed this country by force. There's nothing you can do when a man like him is walking through your town, destroying everybody around you. You have to kind of give up and give in to the power that is Dr. Manhattan. I like that Dr. Manhattan actually does say he regrets it. He says to Angela, have you never done something that you knew you would regret? So he is saying, I regret doing what I was doing. I was trying to fulfill what the Americans wanted me to be, which was a superhero. And immediately afterwards, I regretted it. But he doesn't have the facility to go back and change it. It's done because it's done. So he has that moment of regret, but he knew he was going to regret it when he did it anyway. So I like that they have referenced it that way. Like John, I do like the reference to Zack Snyder not understanding what it is that people love about Watchmen. What I was very impressed with was about 2 or 3 episodes into the show, I saw some people commenting on it going, this isn't like the movie at all. There were so many superheroes in the movie. Everybody was able to like break everything apart and they were all super powered and stuff. And I was going, nobody was super powered in that movie. Nobody except for Dr. Manhattan. He had superpowers. But the way it was shot, and I do love the film, don't get me wrong, but the way it was shot was as a superhero action movie because it had been so rare to get superhero action movies with this kind of depth of storytelling. In a way, watching this series, and it's a massive compliment to the show that they did a great job of bringing Watchmen to the screen and doing a sequel to The Watchmen, which we've said a couple of times on the podcast. But I kind of also get the feeling that if you pulled the Watchmen references out of there and just did this as a straight show, it would have been just as compelling a series. So that's why I believe that loads of people who haven't read the comic book enjoyed it as well, because I think it's so well written, regardless of the source material, regardless of the connections to a source material that you may not have read. I think they've done a great job of making a really compelling story for TV.
I agree.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks so much, Joel.
Yeah, thank you, Joel.
Yes, thank you so much, Joel. And we are always listening to Always Listening Podcast too.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are. We also had some Facebook feedback, and first up on the block is Ray Felix, who said, "Simply brilliant. The poster gives away the ending. My predictions were 100% correct. I'll be praying for a season 2 of Watchmen." Thank you for that, Ray. I'm torn on whether the poster gives away the ending in terms of Angela and Doc Manhattan and all that, but I think it was more just an aesthetic choice, probably from the marketing department.
Well, sorry to correct you, Chris, because Regina King has said this week that she, even when she saw the poster after the episode went out, she went, "Oh my God, how did I not get that?" So in case you don't remember the poster is Sister Night fully dressed in her gear with a massive blue light facing her directly on. So indicating before we even saw the first episode that she would be Dr. Manhattan by the end. And nobody guessed it until about episode 6 or 7. And they went, hang on a second. Are they saying that she's going to be Dr. Manhattan before we even saw the first episode of the show? So it was a choice, but there was definitely sign off from the showrunners on that and from the writers on that it's a good way to hide it in plain sight, as they've liked to do throughout this series. But even Regina King wasn't aware of it until people started pointing it out to her towards the end of the series.
Okay, Ray, I completely take back everything I said. I apologize. Thank you for the feedback. As you to say, simply brilliant.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. And I suppose as well, if Damon Lindelof has said that, the ending is clearly signposted, then I suppose that egg conversation in the bar, along with the poster before episode 1 even aired, probably is clear signpostage enough.
Yep.
Yeah, another little bit of Facebook feedback through from our group. John Higley goes, "A little pontificating here. The original graphic novel has a relatively bleak perspective on concentrated power, even in the hands of those that would seek to do well. Dr. Manhattan, being omnipotent to an extent, is the only one wise enough to decide not to play the game, but is human enough to try at times. The actions of the characters vary based on their level of status, influence, power, and ability. Ozymandias is the most human and the most capable, so he's the one with enough hubris to attempt to rewrite the world. It ends leaving the reader questioning whether that Machiavellian approach is ultimately evil or good, and is largely ambiguous on the matter. This series pays so much respect to that and adds deeper conversations about responsibility, race, power, and ownership. Hooded Justice is ultimately the prime mover, but his goals are never above his ability or station. Fight racism, protect his family, simple, direct, but more powerful in effect than any other character because of his willingness to act. Ozymandias shows the same hubris his daughter does and repeats the actions of the past without learning from them, as does his daughter, Hubris. Looking Glass is the most damaged, but most clear-eyed morally. His actions are more about survival and finding peace than a larger motivation for society. Laurie is jaded and broken. She lives in a state of nostalgia and is consequently reckless. Who cares about tomorrow when everything worthwhile already happened? It takes a combination of hope and Looking Glass showing her a different way to cope with trauma. And then there's the star of the show, Angela. She is clearly the entry point character, audience stand-in, and aspirational figure. In the end, she represents humanity as a whole, and when she's given the opportunity to fix the world and take power, she attempts to, but we are left with the same ambiguity as in the comic. Does she gain ultimate power? Was that choice sound? What is the meaning of power, and how do we define morality? Who has the right to define morality and the limitations of power? Anywho, I just finished it like 5 minutes ago, so these are my off-the-cuff thoughts. It was a very good series, and I'm glad they ended it so succinctly. Hopefully, if they do a season 2, they'll find equally interesting angles to explore with new characters and themes. Thank you so much, John, for the feedback. Yeah, for sure. I really like your point on Laurie. I found her character really just great to watch and how that was portrayed. And I like the point you make about living in a state of nostalgia and consequently recklessness, and that idea that what's the point in the future when everything good has happened, or we just have to recreate the past now and bring it back because that was the best times, hopefully to recreate those best times. And
that sounds very like a hat that I've seen on somebody's head.
No,
at some point.
well, exactly. But I mean, I think Damon Lindelof kind of had the other point about nostalgia, that kind of the idea that it is a wrecking bomb, and I think that's something that in this series is very much evident to me. This idea of people who constantly are looking backwards, and to have that history in their present to reverse things, and other people that are trying to work for a better future. You can apply that to the climate change debate. You can apply that to debates around other countries, to people on welfare, all these things like that. This idea of, well, there's so many more people now on welfare than there used to be, or why don't people just work hard for their day? And it's and it's like, well, because they may be disabled or out of a job and looking for another,
or retired.
Or retired. All these kind of things. So I think it's been an interesting theme for me in this series.
Absolutely. John, 5 minutes after watching the episode and you come up with some fantastic thoughts and some fantastic ideas. Get a podcast, man. You'll be able to do this. We take days coming up with some concepts. One thing, can I jump in here quickly after John's feedback, because it's reminded me there's something that I wrote down on my original notes to talk about in the episode, and I've seen it crop up a bunch of times here and I completely keep forgetting to talk about it. When Will is talking to Angela and says the phrase to her about Dr. Manhattan, he's very powerful, but he didn't do very much with that power. He should have done a lot more being as powerful as he was. I don't want to ignore the fact that that's not just a statement about Dr. Manhattan. That's a statement about everybody in power. That's a statement about all the people that say, isn't it awful what happened to African Americans over the history of their time in this country? They were taken as slaves in the country. They were treated really badly. They were destroyed in the Tulsa Massacre, and they've been continually put down over the century by people in power. Well, if you're in power, then why didn't you do something about it? You had many, many opportunities to do something about it. All of us did. Every single one of us did. That is the statement that Will's saying here. It's not just about the superpowered being that is Dr. Manhattan. I think it's really important to not miss that from the conversation that we've had about this show. It's saying everybody putting their hands on their heads and going, oh, isn't it awful? Isn't it terrible? That helps nobody. What Will has done in this episode is take out the revenge that he has been seeking for decades on this group, the KKK, effectively. He's done that. That's what everybody should be doing. They should be taking out the anger on the KKK, taking it out on the people that are making lives hell for the people around them, not just going, isn't it awful? You're a person in power, do something about it, is his point, I think. So just want to make sure that we don't miss that as in all the discussions about this show that we've had.
Yes, thank you so much, John. There's not much more I can say that the guys haven't already commented on, or the fantastic points that you've raised. It does come down to power, and I'm really interested to see if they do a season 2. I really don't know at this point. I think money may point the way, and I'm interested to see what angles they may explore too. Characters and themes, as you say. So thank you so much. We also have some feedback from Richard Blaze, who said, that was a masterful piece of television from the very beginning to the utter end. Don't be sad it's over. Be happy that it happened.
Nice, Richard.
Yes, very good.
Good quote.
Yes.
Good quote. Cathal Fitzgerald also gave us some feedback over on our group on TV Podcast Industries, where he said, loved it. Very satisfying on first watch, as it seems to have stuck the landing. 9 out of 10. Questions remains about Judd's role. Why the conflict kicks off 3 weeks before Judd's death, the horseshoe in year 1, Laurie's laugh, looking up at the sphere that dropped the space junk, why Angela hesitates before presenting Cal's body to John, why Chu says so much to Angela, and Lubman, of course. I like the ultimate ambiguity over Angela and Dr. Manhattan's power, but I do hope Damon Lindelof knows the Watchmen audience and has clarity on the details in the show, not just in the auxiliary material. That will make it a 10 out of 10 for me. Still, the TV highlight of 2019, and fingers crossed for a season 2. And fingers crossed for another set of pods from TV Podcast Industries. Bravo all round. Thanks, Cathal. Thank you, Cathal. Appreciate it. Yes, there will be mighty more pods coming from TV Podcast.
Mighty more?
Mighty
more. You know, I'm going real Irish now.
That is not an Irish phrase. Don't believe him. He just said the word many more wrong, fellow watchers. I promise.
Let people imagine.
I think he said minty more.
Let the imagination run wild of what the carefree Irish man does while jaunting through the fields, you know.
They are all going to start all of their feedback with top of the morning to you, Chris. Do you really want that, do you?
No, please,
right.
No one, please do that. Anyway, back to what Cathal was saying. Some great questions, and I think you're right. I think the ambiguity is there to let us think about what they could be. It's the same as the Watchmen book. Don't answer everything. Answer as much as you need to answer. Let imagination kind of run wild. Because at the end of the comic book, we were always left with the question of what did happen and what were the other things that were going to go on. So, as the same with this show. And as I've already said, yes, finger crossed for season 2. Yeah. It'd be interesting to see what they do.
Yeah. And in fairness, you know, there is this lovely thing they've been able to do with this show. You know, I think we talked about Twin Peaks a few times, about that show when we were younger. They were able to do things like the Diary of Laura Palmer to give you more impressions and more information that behind the scenes that you may not know if you don't read that book, you know, that kind of stuff. We had Dale Cooper's tapes, you know, that kind of thing. In this show, Peterpedia is its own character in a sense. And I love that they were actually able to squeeze Agent Dale Petey into the show and then into the Lubman outfit and have just a moment on screen where Peterpedia came alive. And if you weren't reading Peterpedia every week, you wouldn't know who this guy is really, because he only has a couple of big moments really, just to talk to Laurie, and that's kind of it. But other than that, his appearance off screen in Peterpedia has actually added so much extra dimension.
Definitely, yeah.
And I think HBO being able to do that and being able to put these articles out every week, that kind of answered a lot of questions. There's some really cool information in there. Check them out, definitely.
And I think the thing is, you know, he wasn't on screen that long, but I love the fact that he was Agent Blake's punching bag. It was just really, really good. And I suppose, sort of sympathy lay as well.
Well, absolutely, yeah. And the FBI leader as well, being really critical of him in the first time you meet him, because he's just this person that absolutely is steeped in the history of masked individuals. So you kind of need a character like that, but you probably don't need them around too much because he'd waylay the story. So I love that that's able to bring the nerdy blogger into the show for a couple of episodes and then take him out of the screen, but he has his own web page effect. It's
absolutely,
kind of cool.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cathal, for the feedback, and I'm glad you're enjoying the podcasts as well. Mike Malone says, "Let me start by saying I have no history with the original graphic novel. It's long been on my to-do list, but I never got round to it. I tuned into this series out of curiosity, and every minute was amazing. The price of admission was an open mind and a willingness to be challenged. Not knowing the source material was never a barrier and never impeded my enjoyment. The writing, acting, direction, and visual style were all stellar. I'd love to see more, but would be satisfied if this is all the Watchmen we ever get. Thank you, TV Podcast Industries, for filling in some of my gaps and providing thoughtful discussion on this amazing series. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some reading to catch up on." Thank you so much, Mike, for that. I'm glad you're about to race on into the 12 issues, probably collected edition, out of Watchmen.
Mm-hmm.
And I absolutely agree. I think the writing, acting, direction, visual style, has just been so good. Yes, there's always going to be something maybe that people do or do not like, but that's because no one is perfect. But I think this is absolutely a great bit of television. One of the series, one of the shows that you can genuinely say it is cinema moving to the small screen to give a 9-hour movie.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This was really great stuff. So, thanks, Mike, for the feedback.
And they built in food breaks at the end of every hour or so as well. It's kind of cool.
They even had a post-credit sequence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I will take one piece of umbrage with what John just said there. I am perfect, so I don't know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Say Damon Lindelof.
Damon Lindelof. Damn it! That's actually the correct pronunciation of his name.
Excellent.
Everyone else is getting it wrong.
Excellent. Speaking of Damon Lindelof, damn it, you guys. Speaking of Damon Lindelof, what he does say in the podcast, the official podcast, the final episode of it is he would expect that someone that takes on a season 2 would be someone that watches this series and sees something that they don't really agree with or think could be changed, think that there is a problem or problems that can be fixed by doing another season, because he felt the same way about the original Watchmen comic book, always felt some little things about representation or about the reality of the American experience that weren't included in the book, that he thought he could bring to it when he did a TV show. So that's kind of where he stands. So maybe when you read the book, Mike, you might see something in there that might inspire you for something else that might happen in a second season. But I'm totally satisfied with this first and maybe only season and only drop in the ocean here for Watchmen. It's fascinating. There's so many articles that came out since the last episode aired. I think everybody I know that's been involved in the cast or crew, all of them have been interviewed about whether there's going to be a second season, and they're all going, we'd love to. We have no ideas how to do it, but we'd love to do it. We're all signed up. We have contracts. All the actors are all signed for more than one season. Now, Damon Lindelof is saying he's not going to be involved, but he has also said he might if the right idea came in, kind of thing. So, right now, still no idea whether there will be a second season.
I do see that maybe he won't lead the writer's room. I think that's he'll stay maybe executive producer.
Maybe
he'll help guide based on his genuine. He said that this production of season 1 or the series was a team effort, where he had the initial concept, but the gestation was done by a team of writers, of all different races, creeds, ethnicities, everything in between. So I think it's going to be very much that maybe he won't have the Genesis idea, but maybe he'd come in as a kind of, he'll be a staff writer and someone else will show run, but he'll be an executive producer.
Maybe.
But again, let's wait and see. We are only a couple of days post episode 9, post the end. So let's see where we are in 2020. Mike, thank you so much as well. I didn't get to say it, but yes, we're happy to fill in all the gaps. And we're happy that you enjoyed it. Now go, continue reading, enjoy the masterpiece that was the original, and let us know your feedback on that over on the group. Boys, I think it's about time we move over to Pedopedia. Obviously, we've been talking about this on every feedback episode.
Yes, it's just one document and one slightly hidden document on this week's Pedopedia. It's effectively Deputy Director Farragut of the FBI firing Agent Dale Peaty and sending a notification to everybody in the FBI to go, this guy was slightly mental, basically. So poor Dale Peaty is no longer a member of the FBI. Quite specifically kind of says that they indulged him a bit too much in his fanaticism for this whole concept of getting the superheroes right and getting their information right. He basically says he's deleting Pedopedia, he's getting rid of all of the files that Agent Peaty has. If anybody wants anything from his office, including multiple copies of Rorschach's journal, he's got them all in there. The whole concept of putting up the schematics for the pornographic space-age sex toys is the wrong way for FBI to conduct themselves, this kind of stuff. So it's a really interesting document, but does put paid to this whole idea of who Dale Peaty is and where he's gone. There's a little link in there, mentions that they found some canola oil in his office. Canola oil is the substance that Lube Man used on himself to slide into that sewer. So if you click on the words canola oil, it comes up with a wanted poster for Lube Man as well. So all dotted in there, effectively confirming that Dale Petey is Lube Man and that he is no longer working for the FBI, unfortunately.
I like the little reference to Nine Inch Nails here with the Manhattan Project, obviously with Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails doing the soundtrack for this series.
And another nice little reference in there, because I was going to come to that in 1 second. It's not Nine Inch Nails, John. It's the Nine Inch Nails. They've only ever been called the Nine Inch Nails once before, and it was in their appearance on Twin Peaks. They were called the Nine Inch Nails. The band is actually Nine Inch Nails.
That's true.
There's a little reference there. The volume 3 of the Watchmen soundtrack is actually covered as if it's the latest album from the Nine Inch Nails, and it is called The Manhattan Project, volume 3 of it, with all the information about how the band formed, when they formed, why they formed, and a complete historical creation of the band The Nine Inch Nails in the universe of Watchmen, which I think is really cool. And everybody's joking about the fact that this means that Twin Peaks is in the same universe as Watchmen, and that's why it's so odd and strange and different. It's because a couple of years before the death of Laura Palmer, a squid dropped in New York, and it's affected all of them as well. Nice touches, huh?
It's an interesting theory.
I love it. Little documents here and there just to mess with people's heads. Excellent stuff. So another great entry from PTPD. Just some interesting add-ons there.
Yes, I do love the part where it does say that Agent Blake is alive and well, and she wishes to thank those who cared for her pet owl while she was away. She is not Harry Potter, but she does have a very special owl.
Yes, and I also like the jab from Deputy Director Farragut, who says the legacy of PCpedia is that let it not be an example of how to conduct electronic discourse professionally.
Love it. That's it for PTpedia for this week. We have one thing left, and it is our table quiz. Everybody looking forward to this?
Yes, it is, fellow watchers, and dare I say it to those who participated, fellow quizzers, who joined in. It was a very, very tight race indeed. And in fact, it came down to the wire, for sure. Mm-hmm. But I think what we will do is we will run through, the answers to each of the questions. And then we will reveal the winner. I can say without a shadow of a doubt, this was very, very close for all of those involved. Yeah, we had a lot of quizzes sending in their answers, but we have 5 that are close to the top here. So congratulations to you all. But of course, there can only be one winner.
Like Highlander.
Yes.
There can be only one.
For the tote bag and Watchmen t-shirt from London Comic Con, and also the Watchmen Comics companion book by Dave Gibbons as well.
Absolutely. Without further ado, let's get into the questions and answers session. Our first question on episode 1 and 2 was name the aerial vehicle that makes an appearance in the first 2 episodes of the HBO Watchmen series.
So the answer to this is the biplane.
Yes.
That was seen dropping the propaganda over the American soldiers in World War One, and of course bombing Tulsa in the first episode.
And the reason this came about was because John was watching it going, there's no way there was a biplane in Tulsa dropping, but oh, that's actually true. That also happened in real life. So that's why it stood out to you. But there was a slight question in the first episode, right?
Yes. So, of course, we would also accept Archie, even though later on, and I think quite later on, I think it was the first time we see the construction of Lady True's Millennium Clock that we kind of understand that Archie wasn't there. Yeah. It was actually one of those kind of Stingray looking aerial vehicles. But we will accept that because obviously at the time of submission in episode 1, we too had written that down as an answer to the first question.
Exactly. On to question 2. What distinguishing item is on the robes deep in the closet at Jug Crawford's home in episode 2?
Yes, so the answer is the sheriff or police badge on the KKK robes found in the hidden space in the closet at the Crawford family home.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so for question 3 of episode 3, we asked, what does Agent Blake carry in the metal case that we see in the episode 3 of the HBO Watchmen series?
You said you delete those out of the out of the questions, John, so we didn't have to repeat them every time.
So, yes, well, it's not a silver rocket. It is a blue rocket, some space balls, and, of course, the Esquire magazine with Silk Spectre Takes Manhattan. Brilliant. So a very sexual answer to the question.
You know, it's one of those wonderful ones that a lot of these questions were written as just after we'd recorded our podcast, sometimes a little bit in advance of people actually seeing the episodes. So suddenly that whole thing completely blew up after John had written the question down, not knowing that everybody in the world would want to know what the hell the blue rocket was. I've seen so many memes. We've seen the blueprints for them as well. So, yeah, interesting stuff.
Yes. Question number 4. We asked, how much did Mr. and Mrs. Clark get paid by Lady True in episode 4 of the HBO Watchmen series?
So the answer to this is a baby boy, or dare we say it, a legacy, and a $5 million trust fund for moving, baby food, diapers, and college fees.
That's right.
So the answer is a legacy, or baby, and a $5 million trust fund. Either of those two answers are acceptable.
Very good. Very good.
Excellent. Question number 5. What vegetable helped Looking Glass track down the 7th Cavalry in the HBO Watchmen series?
It was a romaine lettuce, but a lettuce will do as well.
Any lettuce.
So it links back to that opening shot with the police officer, the masked police officer, stopping over a truck, seeing the lettuce in the back, going to the back to his car, and then being fired upon by one of the 7th Cavalry members. And we see Wade, or Looking Glass, seeing this same lettuce in the car park of the bar where he met the woman. But of course, it was all a trap.
Yes, exactly. We did talk about this, didn't we? That the lettuce was actually there just to cover up the batteries that were in the truck. Yeah.
Yep.
So everybody was wondering what the symbolism of the lettuce was. There was no symbolism. We were just being distracted by lettuce being in front of the batteries. That's all it was.
It's the same with a good burger. You're getting distracted by lettuce.
There you go. Exactly. Question 6 on our pub quiz. What is the name of the Jewish family who owned the delicatessen that was set ablaze by Fred, who owned the grocery store FT and Sons in episode 6?
And the answer here is the Rosenblum family.
This was the most difficult, I think, of all of the questions. This is one that you had to pause at a specific scene.
Definitely.
And you could see it. But yes, a few incorrect answers given here, and a few people dropped out of the running.
Yes. And also for the second question, we had a few wrong answers as well.
Yeah,
yes.
that's right.
Question number 7. In Vietnam, before the explosion, how many marionettes were being operated at the puppet show in episode 7 of the HBO Watchmen series? Bonus point if you can split the total number of marionettes by the different characters they represent.
Yes. So the correct answer is 9. And the bonus is there are only 2 different characters. There is Dr. Manhattan, and then there are 2 sets of 4 Viet Cong altogether. So 8 Viet Cong in total. So they're the only characters that are there on the marionette theatre.
Interesting one, that one.
And of course, if you said those 2, then you absolutely get the bonus point.
Question number 8. What does Dr. Manhattan bring to the table the first time he meets Angela Abar in episode 8 of the HBO Watchmen series?
The answer that we were looking for were 2 beers, 2 ice cold beers. Dare I say it, 2 ice cold beers in Saigon, not in
Tulsa?
Not in Tulsa and not in Casablanca either.
I was killed in Alex. I think you talked about, yeah.
That was it. But that was Casablanca, wasn't it?
It was. Yeah, I think so.
Just to say on that, most people got it right that it was beer, but some people did only say what a beer.
Yes.
So I gave you half a point for that, and simply because it was what Dr. Manhattan brought to the table.
Yeah, and it's important because he brings 2 because he's so confident and knows, in fact, that he's going to be in conversation with Angela and he's going to need the beer while he's there. It's going to be the 2 of them with the beers, so it needs to be 2 beers. I was impressed somebody else added something to it, which I was very impressed with. There was another item also brought by Dr. Manhattan to the table.
Yes, someone did also mention a Dr. Manhattan face mask, which of course he was wearing.
Yes.
And I suppose, yes, technically he brought that to the table. Yeah. He also brought the clothes that he was wearing as well. So,
full marks.
So we just kept it to the beers, on that one. But, good spots. It was the same for the marionette one as well. I think some people mentioned that there was a helicopter there, that there was a Cyclops thing, but just again, well spotted. But we were looking for characters.
Yes.
But drum roll on to question 9, Chris.
Question number 9. Quoting an ancient Egypt inscription to the newspaper seller, name the places Adrian Veidt mentioned when he first sees Lady True's quantum centrifuge and professes that the end is nigh. In episode 9 of the HBO Watchmen series.
Don't need to say that every time.
Well, doesn't matter now.
I know, but it's so much fun. You wrote it a few times. I just gotta keep up.
And the answer is, of course, Egypt, Palestine, and Israel. Yes, one of the first and only references in ancient Egypt to Israel, which is quite interesting. And of course, it was, I believe, that the inscription comes from a tomb that is opposite Karnak on the other side of the Nile that was built there by Ramesses II's son when he became pharaoh after Ramesses II.
There we go.
And the quote, of course, from Adrian Veidt is, Israel is desolate and her seed is no more. Palestine is become a widow for Egypt. I think Adrian Veidt's quote here isn't exactly how it has been interpreted from the hieroglyphics on the inscription at, I think it's Menafta, is the site in Egypt, if that's how you pronounce it.
Right.
Apologies if I've not pronounced it.
But interesting that it's opposite Karnak, which is Karnak obviously being Adrian Veidt's home in the Antarctic.
Yeah.
Or the Arctic. I could never remember which one's which. The Antarctic, probably. Right.
Yes, the Antarctic. But that brings us to the end of our Watchmen pub quiz with a mighty bang, a drum roll, and everything in between. John, do you want to read out the results?
Yes, so our top 5 quizzes. So in 5th place with 8.5 points out of 10 is David Horrocks.
So close, David. Well done.
Yeah, really good.
Congratulations.
Then we have 4th and 3rd, Steve Brown and Jimbo, who got 9 out of 10.
Oh, well done. God,
Yeah, so
close.
congratulations. Joint 3rd, I suppose.
Yeah.
Then in 2nd, we have Benjamin Owsley, with 9.5 out of 10.
So close.
Yes, so close, so close.
But there can be only one.
There is only one winner, and that is Will Walton, who got full marks, 10 points out of 10. So, congratulations, Will. You are the tote bag wielding, t-shirt wearing, Watchmen comics companion book reading winner of the Watchmen book quiz. So a big congratulations to you, and also a big congratulations to the top 5 and everyone else who participated in the Watchmen pub quiz. I had a really good time writing the questions. I hope you had a great time writing in the answers, trying to figure out what the hell I was talking about.
I know I did.
It was probably it's like, that slow car crash. That was a pub quiz over 9 weeks, everyone.
That is the slowest pub quiz
That is the
ever.
slowest pub quiz. Normally they rush through it so they can get to the bar and drink about 20 pints, because there's been about 100 arguments over what the actual answer is,
Exactly.
which is always the point of a pub quiz.
Genuinely, fellow watchers, John has enjoyed this so much that he's already been talking about doing a monthly pub quiz for our Patreon listeners. He's thinking about how to set that up so we could do a live pub quiz with some of our fellow watchers potentially in the future. So watch this space. You may see that in 2020.
Yeah, so thank you so much, fellow watchers and fellow quizzers, for getting involved in that pub quiz. It was really good fun. And again, big congratulations to Will Walton there with his 10 out of 10. We will certainly be in touch to ask you where we can send on the goodies to you for your win. So yeah, thanks everyone on the Watchmen pub quiz.
Congratulations, Will. That was fantastic. Yeah, well done.
Yes, thank you so much, Will. But ladies and gentlemen, fellow watchers, this has been the final bulletin of our Atomic Watchers episode, and basically the final episode of our Watchmen coverage. It has been fantastic. We've enjoyed talking to you. We've enjoyed the show. We've enjoyed talking to each other and discussing these episodes. But you know what that means. That's it for the Watchmen, and that's it for TV podcast industries in 2019. We hope everyone enjoys the holidays, get a break, return, unwind, get a mug of eggnog or a nice whiskey, sit in front of the fire, curl up with a good book, a good comic book, a good TV show, whatever relaxes you. We will return early in 2020 with our thoughts about all the shows and movies we covered in 2019. And we will also be talking and announcing some of the shows we'll be looking at in 2020. So watch this space.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just one quick thing. Don't forget there are loads of shows coming out for Christmas this year. There's some really good stuff that you got to check out. Witcher is coming out on Netflix. It's probably out as we release this episode. So check that out. Expanse season 4.
Oh, I know.
Is coming out, John. I know that you're really excited about that as well. Yeah. Obviously we are giving up our night tonight, which is the latest Star Wars premiere night is on tonight. We're giving it up for the podcast, but I think we're all going over this weekend, right? We're all going to see Star Wars this weekend.
Yes,
tomorrow, in
because
fact,
the
yes.
prequels are just as good as the originals, which are just as good as the new ones.
Well, everybody has their own opinions, Chris,
Exactly.
as we always
They're
like to
good
say on this
opinions.
podcast.
Opinions are like flavor. Everyone has them and everyone likes them different.
Exactly. But let's reveal the first thing that we know we are covering in 2020. We might as well. You've been waiting a long time throughout this podcast and throughout the season to find out what we're doing next. We know we are definitely going to be covering Star Trek Picard coming to the world on Amazon Prime from January 23rd. It's going to be an episodic show. There's 10 episodes confirmed for the first season. We'll be covering it weekly as well when it starts coming out, the start of next year. And it has already been confirmed for season 2. That's usually a sign of quality, isn't it? Although Watchmen didn't get a season 2 yet. I don't know. I don't know what's a sign of quality anymore, other than watching the shows and finding out whether it's quality.
Do you know what a good sign of quality is? Sir Patrick Stewart.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Jean-Luc with his old boiled egg head.
What?
It was segueing from the egg theme in Watchmen.
Interesting. Already confirmed lots of appearances from the cast of The Next Generation. I think myself and John definitely were of age when that show began. I think, Chris, you were probably of age when that show ended and started off your geekdom as well. So I think we're all got a little bit of Star Trek Next Generation fandom in our minds.
Coming of age. It sounds like Canterbury Tales or something like that. It was only
Hark,
the 1990s.
Back in the day, I do
Yeah.
hear Stardate 11112.
Lo behold, thee heareth a spaceship.
I think you'll find that it premiered in 1987 and finished in the early 90s.
That was
John.
it, yeah.
Yes. So,
Yeah, but we were very far behind in the UK. It wasn't like now where everyone gets het up with, oh, it's 2 seconds later than before. This was 2 years. 2 years.
I actually went to my first and probably one of my only ever Star Trek conventions just so I could see the first 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine, which had appeared on screens in America a year beforehand. and I still had to go to a convention to watch 2 episodes of it before it was released in Ireland. There you go. That's how far behind we were. And we complain when we don't get something like Good Omens the day it's released in America, or 3 months or 6 months, isn't it, for the Disney Plus shows? So,
Yes.
yeah, going to be fun.
Yes, so there we are. We are transforming from fellow watchers to fellow trekkers. That is your first bit of news for this upcoming 2020. Make sure you stay subscribed to the podcast at tvpodcastindustries.com for all our future podcasts. We'll be announcing more and also going through those other ones that we just talked about. You can show your love and show your support over on patreon.com/tvpodcastindustries and help us keep on the lights, keep on the servers, and generally just have fun and keep talking. But you can also support us by sharing the podcast with your friends. It's sharing the love. And don't forget, while you're there, sure, leave us a 5-star rating, because 5-star rating mean you love us.
If you have the time, of course. Once again, yes, thank you to everybody that's been supporting us on Patreon, and thanks to everybody that's been sharing the podcast over the year. This has been a phenomenally successful year for TV Podcast Industries. We moved everything into one big pot this year, from having Defenders TV Podcast over on one side covering Marvel and Gotham TV Podcast covering DC, moved it all into TV Podcast Industries. We've had more downloads this year and more new listeners this year than in any year in our 5-year history. So that's thanks to all of you that have been staying with us for all of our episodes coverage. Thank you so much for spending the time with us this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I get quite misty-eyed here with our usual festive wishes to our fellow watchers, fellow defenders, fellow Gothamites, fellow Omeniters. I can't even remember what I call them, fellow boys and girls. But certainly, yes, it's been great having everyone come on board, giving their feedback, listening to the podcast, enjoying the shows with us. Yeah, it was really good. Yeah, thank you so much.
It was Angels and Demons.
That was it.
Yes.
Fellow Angels and Demons.
For Good Omens, yes. Good Omens been confirmed that it's being released on BBC on January 15th. So if you haven't seen it yet, watch it there. And we have podcasts to cover that as well. Loads and loads of stuff going on. We have so many episodes and so many things that we've covered over the years, and so much more to come. Until next time, fellow watchers.
Yes, thank you so much. Keep listening, and we will see you we'll hear you, or you'll hear us in 2020.
Yeah, as always, fellow watchers, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great having you on board for this episode, and of course, for all of 2019. It is just for me to say festive wishes and happy Christmas, fellow watchers. May all your Christmases be blue. Remember, keep watching, keep listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, another bit of Faceback
feedback. Our favourite type of feedback is Faceback.
You backed your face? I have.
This was a Televisual Podcast Industries production. You have been listening to the Watchmen podcast.